Welcome, everybody. My name is Isis Lopez. I am the Community Engagement Specialist for the Development Services Department. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we officially begin, I want to quickly review our engagement format for today's meeting. We're going to start with a presentation and then close with a Q&A session. Questions can be posted in the Q&A bank by selecting that option at the bottom of your screen. If you are having issues with that function, please feel free to chat one of the meeting hosts and we'll help you troubleshoot any issues that you might be expecting. While we hope to answer all of the questions that you might have, for those we don't have information for, we will post a follow-up response. I would also like to note that this meeting is being recorded and you will receive a link to the presentation and a recording of it as well. We have also an American Sign Language interpreter with us today. And so I have spotlighted that one for y'all, so you will be able to see that interpretation as it is happening. Again, all of our questions will be using the Q&A function. With us today, we have several subject matter experts to talk about our site plan Lite and Infill plat proposals. And this is a community meeting to talk about that. We are going ahead and get started. If you can go to the next slide now. All right, so with that, I will turn it over to Matt from Watershed Protection.
Hey, it's really good to be with you today, and this is a presentation I'll make, and I'll really look forward to getting some good questions from you guys at the end. And what I've tried to do is put together a lot of graphics that show the kind of, you know, in a more visual way. Some of you have seen some of these presentations before. I will start by talking about what this is. Infill, the council and community as a whole have been very focused on housing in the last number of years. And one of the options to getting more housing is to have infill development, which occurs primarily within existing residential areas. And it is one key factor in meeting key strategy to meeting the city's housing goals. The city recently, the council recently updated our zoning regulations to facilitate infill development. And so you've heard of Home 1 and Home 2 and of Site Plan Lite potentially. And I'll go through some of these more explanation of these as we go along. But as somebody who is seeking to build one of these projects, they have to meet a variety of different regulations to make that happen. And some of the non-zoning regulations are not really set up for this scale of development. They're set up for a larger scale of development. And so, say if you're looking at housing, maybe they kind of focus on either individual homes at a building permit level, or at large multifamily projects at what we call a site plan level, or maybe a large subdivision in the subdivision phase. And so there's not really, our code prior to Home 1 and Site Plan Lite haven't really been calibrated to do that. And so council specifically asked us to look at that. And that's what those two resolutions are. That's what this, they're asking us to look at both very small scale residential subdivisions and multifamily projects with 5 to 16 units in size. And so what we're trying to do as staff is right size these non-zoning regulations and to make sure that they're not acting as barriers to infill development. And we do, so we did look at this presentation. I work for the Watershed Protection Department. I'm a policy person within our group, and we do have a couple of other key colleagues of mine that can also help answer questions toward the end. We've got our floodplain administrator and our environmental officer on the line here too. But we're going to be talking a lot about watersheds regulations. There are other regulations involved, and we'll briefly touch on those, but most of those are not, don't have to do with the land development code. They have to do with, say, a criteria manual or a procedure. And so that's not part of the ordinance. And we can talk more about that at the Q&A session if you like. So when we talk about the subdivision process, we're talking about further subdividing potentially individual residential lots, single family residential lots. And so that's what Home 2 enabled was going with a smaller lot than the traditional longstanding 5,750 square foot lot. And so in today's world, or yesterday's world, I guess now, prior to Home 2, if you wanted to have somebody be able to have a smaller piece of property than 5,750 square feet, you would have to use a condominium regime. And so the council was wanting folks to have an option to have people to just own outright a smaller piece of land than 5,750, and so they reduced the footprint to the minimum lot size to 1,800 square feet. So that's one of the things we're looking at. So we have not, in our rules up till now, have not had that option. And site plan light has to do with very small scale multifamily projects. These are all over Austin. They were built in in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and so forth. But code made it a little more difficult in the 80s and 90s to do those kind of projects. And so council really wanted us to look at that. But again, our code makes that a little bit harder to do at that scale. And so there's about 3,500 lots currently zoned MF1, MF2, MF3, et cetera, these zones that allow that scale. And so with today's code, the projects would cost significant. So what we're hoping to do is create requirements that would cost significantly less and be significantly less complicated if possible to develop than they do today. But we also want to balance that with positive drainage outcomes and so forth. And so what we've done is we've looked at our drainage regulations, and we understand from many conversations with the development community that is a concern for these very small scale projects. The drainage and flood rules are an important thing to look at, and would have kind of a disproportionate benefit if they're streamlined. However, we don't want to increase flooding, and we don't want to increase negative drainage outcomes. And so we're really trying to balance that. I always want to stress, as I'm talking about this, we're not Home 1 and Home 2 and site plan line. None of these have increased allowable impervious cover. So if you had a certain cap on your project in the past, you still have it. I didn't put this on here, but I have a slide that talks about it. Tree protections remain the same. There's no difference. There's no diminution in regulatory strength on those. We're not reducing water quality protections. For some of these projects, there's a water quality requirement that will stay the same. And very, very importantly, we in Watershed are extremely concerned about development that's in and around a floodplain, and we don't want to have any reduction in strength of our regulations there. And so that, again, is unchanged, and we're very, very particular about that. And there's no increase in number of units with this in this particular case. I'm going to talk. There's a bunch of fine print at the bottom of this slide. I wish I had a little more of a visual of this. I talk a lot about flooding in Austin in my presentations and my outreach with the community. We basically have three scales, if you will, of how that works. Like a whole watershed, like a Waller Creek or a Shoal Creek or a Williamson Creek. Those are very big areas that drain to large creeks and create, and so we have regulated floodplains in those areas, and we look at that scale. When you're talking about individual tiny subdivisions and site plan projects at this multifamily level of 5 to 16 units, that is, you basically cannot tell what's going on when you do the modeling or see that in reality. That's not the level of impact we're going to see. It's been a lot of concern, and understandably so. A lot of folks live in local flood problem areas. The average home is not in one, but they exist, and we're very concerned about it as watershed protection. So that's your local drainage systems, storm drain, inlets and pipes and so forth under roads, small drainage ditches and so forth. As it turns out, and I'll explain and show you some information we got from one of the studies we've looked at. Those are also very marginally impacted by these changes that we're going to be talking about with infill plat and site plan light as well. But those are extremely important to our community and the watershed department that I work for and my colleagues work for, because there are existing issues with many of those areas, and those still need to be looked at. But we believe that this proposal is not going to have a significant impact on those areas. even as we still urgently need to address those issues which do exist. And so that leaves us with the very smallest scale, which is lot-to-lot flooding. And we're as we look at these projects or any project, if you have just a house, you can create. If you build one house, you can create issues. You can build a fence, you can create issues for your neighbor. And so we wanted to make sure that that as we look at this, as we look at how to subdivide at the smallest level, or how to build these very small apartment complexes and so forth, and missing middle projects, how do we make sure that that's something that we look at and zone in on and home in on. All right, so I'm gonna start first with the infill plats. This is the tiny subdivision one. And so I'm gonna go to a not so tiny subdivision picture. This is just real standard looking stuff. You see this from dating way back in Austin, whether it's Hyde Park or Windsor Park, et cetera, all around town, Travis Heights, from the 20s, 30s, 40s. They're going to have something that looks like this, where you subdivide lots and, subdivide a large piece of land into smaller individual lots. And so today we're going to talk about one of the things we'll talk about is a scale of a quarter acre. And so our new proposed rules are going to be looking at anything project that's less than or equal to a quarter acre. And you can kind of see it for scale. That's about what it looks like. So this big subdivision is going to have full drainage. It's got roads, it's got water and wastewater lines, and it's going to have storm drainage all through it. And those storm drains are going to lead to a detention pond or a water quality pond, or directly to creeks in the old days. And we still have a lot of that out there. But basically, we have a drainage that's done through streets and pipes and so forth. And these infill plats are not going to affect. They're just the lot itself. They're not going to they don't create new streets. They don't create new storm drainage systems. They just kind of operate within the lay of the land that's already there. That just kind of shows a scale. We're talking about very small projects here. This is an overwhelming slide. It's basically a compilation of all of the proposal for the infill plats for the tiny subdivisions. And so in a second, I'm going to show you individual pictures that show each one of these scenarios, because I'm very visual myself, and I think that's a lot easier to absorb. But I wanted to go over this really briefly, just the scale. So our proposal is going to look at kind of two infill scales, and then there's kind of a greater than that kind of scale. So if there does not apply scale. So if your piece of land is a quarter acre or less, then we're going to have one option, which is the lowest key option, and it's basically like just a single family home at this point in terms of regulations. Then we're going to talk about this other category, which is a quarter acre on up to 1 acre. Now, we could have chosen a lot of different options, but we chose 1 acre for a variety of reasons. But that is kind of the biggest we thought it would be appropriate to use this infill plat option. We actually have existing drainage criteria that have been used for a number of years, where we use this exact threshold of 1 acre. Subdivisions greater than up to a 1 acre have certain special rules that I'll kind of describe when I show you the pictures. But getting anything bigger than that, or anything that doesn't meet certain criteria that we believe might compromise the ability to have a positive storm drainage outcome, then we're going to just default to the full meal deal, full code scenario down here. So without further ado, I'll show you some more interesting pictures. So here's just an existing neighborhood in Austin. They're individual platted lots. And so you see these houses, and there are a variety of sizes. This is a single family. I don't know if this is SF1, SF2, or SF3. Those are zoning classes. But you can see that in most neighborhoods, the houses have been built for some period of time, and as people add on to their houses and make modifications, they tend to try to drift up toward the maximum of 45% footprint or impervious cover on their site. And so you see these guys, some of them are a little smaller than others, but generally people have a piece of property and they're allowed to develop on there up to 45% impervious cover. And so you weren't allowed to put more than 1 or maybe 2 units on properties prior to home 1, but home 1 said, hey, you can put up to 3 units on it. And so in this case, this is actually a small enough lot that it's going to be actually pretty hard to put 3 units on. So I'm using one of our planners had some really good information that talked about different setups that were possible, designs that are possible. And hey, maybe this is a duplex back here and it's a third unit. But anyway, this is a home run project. You just get a building permit and you build 1 or 2 or 3 units, just like, or now with home 2, you build the exact same thing, but in this case, instead of this person having to purchase the whole, one person having to purchase the whole lot and all the units, maybe one person could purchase a subset of that and would be a little more financially in reach. And so that's what home 2 does, is just draws these lot lines in. So you have an interesting situation where you have 2 projects that could look identical, and then yet this home 1 project goes through a building permitting process, which is really simple and fast. And the home 2 project, since it's technically subdividing this, goes through a much longer process. This one's going to take 2 or 3 months to permit and maybe $30,000. And this one's going to take 1.5 to 2 years about 1 to 2 years to permit, and maybe cost $300,000. That's what council wanted us to look at. It's like, wow, that makes sense. Why do you have 2 different things that are these 2 things that are basically the same footprint? Let's figure out a way to make the development of those the same. And by the way, their footprint of these the same. This is 45% impervious cover-ish, or max, and same with these, max 45, max 45. Same tree protections, everything else applies. And then, oops, I didn't put this on there, but anyway, so what we're doing with this, if this first scenario, if it's less than or equal to a 1/4 acre, we want you to be able to not have to go through all the hoops that you would have to for a large subdivision. You're not going to have to build an on-site detention pond. It's the same footprint. And so we don't want to have, we don't believe that you need major differences in an ordinance for these projects, because they essentially have the same environmental and drainage impacts. All right, let's go. That was scenario 1. Now we're going to go to a bigger property. This is a random property in town that has just a bigger footprint. It is more than a 1/4 acre in size. By the way, this is about properties of this type, 1/4 to 1 acre, or about 25% of all those 158,000 lots are in this category. So this is a much more unusual scenario that you have this, but this is a large enough lot that we believe that we need to look at drainage a little more carefully. We can't, more than a 1/4 acre. And we actually already have in our drainage criteria manual, we already have some rules that speak directly to this. If you've got a subdivision of this size, what's going to happen? So this is cartoonish, and I don't know what this would look like. I'm not a land planner. I'm a drainage expert, but this is, let's suppose you take this one lot and you want to put more units on it. It has to stay at 45% impervious cover, but it's got more housing opportunities on it. But we believe that at this scale, we don't want to just use the most basic kind of drainage rules that you would use for an individual single family home. And by the way, you can see the people around these guys using building permits have kind of maxed out their properties over time to 45% using a simple building permit with no special drainage, anything. But we do think this is going to need some drainage, a little harder view. So let's look at a scenario where the surface flows from this property. This is just an example. This is not necessarily the way it does this particular one in real life works. But if this one were to drain happily enough right to the public right of way, or right to a creek right next to it, a drainage system, then hey, that's a good outcome. This water is not going to run into its neighbor. It's going to run to where we want it to go, which is the street. And streets are set up for drainage. They are part of the drainage network. So if this is the case, then we think that you can use something a little simpler than the full meal deal of got to do a detention pond potentially, or do all kinds of other things. And so we think that if you could show that using natural drainage, no effort by the needed to get the water where we want it, that we can have a simple situation where you don't have to have as much engineering and other analysis done, or a detention pond. We hear from the development community when they see this proposal, they were saying, well, gosh, that's going to limit the number of lots that can use this simplified version. And we would actually agree with that. There are only a subset of lots are going to actually happily enough just happen to drain right to the road or to a drainage easement or something right next to them. But this is kind of made to order to have fewer drainage issues. Now, what if you had a site that sort of sloped off its water into a neighbor, but generally you could actually regrade the water, meaning reshape your land, put a little swale in, a French drain, various options here. Pretty simple like stuff actually, but just drain it back so that it does get to the public right away. All right, that's good. That's better. But we believe that it would be helpful to have some oversight of that and make sure that this is done correctly, is done adequately. And so it's not just water runs downhill and goes to the right spot. This was something where you put in some kind of engineered feature. And so this exists today. You can already do this situation, but we're going to continue to ask that people do it and not. So this first one I showed you did not have an RSMP, Regional Stormwater Management Plan payment. So you don't have to go through all the analysis and a payment. This one still does. We're asking people to continue to do that. Okay, but that's still a simplified thing. You don't end up with a detention pond on your project because you don't need it. You can get the water where you want it to the public right away. And now here's the unfortunate, in some cases, you just have runoffs going straight backward or right, and then maybe it's steep. Well, that's a problem. And so in today's world, you're going to have to build a detention pond, and then in this ordinance, that would continue to be the case. This little bit larger project, larger than quarter acre, up to 1 acre, is still going to have to build a small scale detention pond to meet code. So that's the breakout of the different for the infill plats small subdivisions stage. All right, I'm going to turn next to those miniature multifamily projects in the 5 to 16 unit range. Another exciting table. And this one doesn't have a row at the top that says, hey, if you're less than a quarter acre, then you don't have to do any special drainage. You just do the same thing that you do at a drainage for a building permit. This one, it just goes from 0 to half an acre, and then half acre to 1 acre. And I'll just, and rather than go through this whole table, which is great for information, and we will share this PowerPoint with everybody, and you can refer to this later. So let's just turn to an example. Here's an existing project that was built, I think it's around 2012, looking at some information I was looking at, somewhere in that range. So this exists in the real world. And it's about, I think it's 10 units. It was either 8 or 10 units big. And in the case, in actuality, this one did run off straight to the street next to it. And so they were able to direct the roofs and this pervious cover, the parking and everything to go right to this public right of way here. So that was a fortunate situation for them. And actually, when they went through the permitting process, they did not have to build a detention pond. They were able to show that and this is about a little bit under a half an acre. So it kind of fits into the first category. And so the water is going to go into the road. In fact, I'll show you a picture of it. There's a storm drain inlet right there. So the water comes off, goes into the storm drain inlet, goes into the system as it's supposed to do. And so what we're proposing is that something like this that gets built in the future wouldn't have to go through a whole bunch of drainage calculations and other things to show what's going on. They would not be expected to build a detention pond at this scale. Half an acre is not going to put a lot of pressure onto the drainage system. And so in terms of the local drainage system, like I talked about earlier, so this water comes off, goes into the road, goes into the storm drain inlet. Maybe in other cases, it would have to go down a little further to get into the storm drain. But we're basically saying that's okay. The impacts of that are going to be reasonable, and so you're not going to have to pay extra engineering costs and RSMP, Regional Stormwater Management Program payments, and so forth. Now, what if your runoff, kind of like this, is real similar? It looks like those infill plat guys examples. So what if the runoff sort of slopes, unfortunately, to the neighbors instead of going straight to the street? Well, we're not as confident that that's going to go well. And so we don't want to just say, hey, just use a super simple drainage plan, that you don't have to have an engineer for. This one, you're going to need a little more help. And by the way, this project had an engineer and went through the whole thing. So this is really similar to what we're doing now. You would regrade your site, you make sure the water goes from your project into into a public right of way, a drainage system, and make sure that the neighbors are not affected. Um, and so, we're going to continue to ask that you have some engineering, that you pay a payment, but you don't have to build a detention pond. And this is what we're doing now, by the way. This is already in place. It's just that we have this other simpler option. If you can show how easy it is to get the water there, you don't have to go through this step. But this one is for those that need to regrade. And there's some inspection of that it makes sure that it happens. Okay, here's the version where, oops, the water is going backward into neighbors. Maybe it's steep, maybe it's just hard to get. You can't actually regrade it easily or successfully. And so we're going to ask you to put that runoff into a detention pond, which would meter out the water during an actual flood, and reduce what we call the peak flow of the storm event. So in that one, it's exactly what you do for even a bigger project. This could be 10 acres, it could be 1, it could be whatever. You'd need engineering. And it would not be an RSMP option. I mean, lots of times people come to us and ask to participate in the regional stormwater management program. And if they had this situation, we would have to say, you know what, you don't qualify. That doesn't work. You're going to have to do an on-site detention pond. Here's a picture of it in real life. It shows, here's that storm drain inlet. So water's coming in through the center of the project. It goes into the storm drain and then goes on out. And then this is interesting. These projects, these missing middle projects, are limited to 60 or 65% impervious cover, depending on their zoning. And so in this case, actually, they had some protected trees. Well, you got to still protect them with this. And they actually ended up creating this kind of nice open space in here for their residents. And they also protected these trees. This project was not able to achieve its full 60 or 65%. I think it was limited to 65%, looking at its development, its permit, its design plans. And so they only ended up with about 54% impervious, just because of some constraints they had. But they built it, and 10 different households, families are able to live in this project. And so that's it for the little examples of the drainage. I just want to make a few other comments on this. So the ordinance itself is mostly about drainage and some changes. There is a kind of a wonky impervious cover element to it. It actually makes sure that as you split a property into a tiny, potentially very small little pieces, that you would fully account for the impervious cover. So we didn't want to use these kind of broader assumptions we use for bigger projects. We wanted to use something a little more fine-grained. And so that's make sure that people kind of assume the very highest impervious cover for purposes of just planning the project out and so forth. So that's a protection on the neighborhood side. And then on site plan review, there's this category called small project category. Chris Johnson is going to be on the line if you have other questions about that. He knows a ton about this, and so does Brent Lloyd, who's on the call as well. But basically, it streamlines the permitting process a little bit, and for these really small projects. Storm drain connection. There's these projects as they connect to storm drains nearby. This can be a pretty big cost to connect to storm drains, and if it's not really warranted, that's not a good fit. We don't want to have really small projects have to do really high key, build long stretches of pipe in the public right of way when it's not really that crucial. And so we're going to be proposing some amendments to the drainage criteria manual about that. But we also don't want to have issues too, so we're balancing those as well. And then I talked a little bit about the regional stormwater management program, and it does allow people to not build a detention pond at this super small scale now. We want to extend that to projects between half an acre and an acre, as long as they don't exceed 65% impervious cover. And we think that's a good fit for this, and would allow some projects to reduce the complexity of their project without compromising drainage outcomes. And so then we've also so this is out of my direct area of expertise, but my DSD colleagues who are running this, shepherding this project, are also working with the transportation department to look at some right-of-way dedication issues. talking with Austin Water and Austin Energy about some different utility considerations, and also with the Parks Department, looking at parkland dedication items. So are there ways to streamline some of these things, still get the things we need for public infrastructure and the public good, but also not send people through unnecessary hoops if that's a possibility?
Matt, Matt, it looks like Brent probably.
Oh
has
yeah,
a
Brent.
comment.
Yeah. And Brent, if you want me to back up to any particular slide, please.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, actually, that's a good slide to land on. And thanks, Matt, for the amazing presentation. Really appreciate all the detail and the visuals that you provided. I just want to echo a comment that Matt made in terms of this is not all about the land development code. Drainage, of the requirements, the non-zoning requirements that most significantly impact infill, drainage is the one that resides in the land development code. And so the code amendment piece of our proposal is focused on drainage. We have evidence that can account for as much as 35 to 45% of project costs for infill. And we think right sizing it is a very significant move forward to lessening the regulatory burden on infill. And the city also confronts a lot of problems with the microponds that are difficult to maintain and don't provide a lot of value in terms of detention relative to their effects on housing. A lot of our staff report, which is available on the Planning Commission backup, and I think we can also provide a link to it in follow-up communications. It emphasizes that our proposal includes a lot of departmental level criteria manual amendments, as well as just sort of changes to practices. And on this slide, we have some really important ones. So with right-of-way, most infill projects don't require the dedication of right-of-way, but there's a process for getting that determination that right-of-way won't be required that can be cumbersome and add time to the review process. So we have worked closely with TPW, Transportation and Public Works, and they have issued a memo that will basically, for projects that are on level 1 streets, there will be just a handful of very basic criteria that have to be met. And then there will be a determination of no right-of-way dedication required. And that will, incrementally help to improve the review process by removing one discretionary step in the process. Utilities are challenging, and we believe that further work is necessary on this. And we have, as many of you know, we have the Technical Advisory Review Panel, which is a DSD-led stakeholder group that includes staff participation as well as design professionals. And our plan, and we have the rules administrator who leads that group with us today. And our plan is to use the TARP to focus on proposing changes that are appropriate for the utility issues, specifically the Austin Energy clearances. And Austin Energy has agreed to participate in that process. They're not bound by it, but they are actively engaged in the TARP and will consider, recommendations that come out of that. And additionally, just like with right-of-way dedication, parkland dedication is usually not required for infill, but the process of getting a determination that it's not required can be cumbersome and adds on to the review process. So we're working closely with our colleagues in PARD, and we're not quite as far along as we are with the right-of-way issue, but we're confident that we're going to get to a place where that process gets to be easier. And so those are, I think, my primary comments. I do want to emphasize that, as Matt said, this proposal does not increase density. So it's decidedly a non-zoning set of amendments. So there are no increases in density provided. And so for 5 to 16 units, those are basically going to be projects that are multifamily zone, that projects that want to use affordability unlocked to achieve those densities in other zones will be able to do so. And then they would be able to use the modified drainage standards as well, but there's not any sort of zoning classification proposed that would expand the properties where you can actually do 5 to 16 units. And so we're excited about this proposal. We believe it's going to make a real difference. It's not going to solve all the problems, but we have, I think, some fairly well charted out pathways going forward to focus efforts on making improvements in specifically the utilities and some of the other issues that are not part of our proposal in terms of any immediate change. I do want to emphasize with the utility issue that Austin Water has proactively agreed to look at making its early determination process for determining whether upgrades to infrastructure will be required to make that process more robust. And specifically, they proposed formalizing a process of pre-development meetings that would really help to nail those issues down at the front end so that there aren't surprises going forward. And we also think, as Matt mentioned on the prior slide, one of the big items of feedback that we received from stakeholders during our testing session was the storm drain connection requirement, and the proposal that Watershed, to its credit, has proposed for the DCM on that, we think is going to make a real difference. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that one of the goals of this project is to sort of right size our regulations so that if you're just building projects with a straight building permit, multiple units on a lot, that you're not going to face a whole lot greater regulatory burden if you're choosing to do that through small lot subdivision. As one of the comments, I think, from Brita Wallace indicated, the method of ownership, whether it's building permits all on one lot or separate lots through a subdivision, it's still fundamentally the same development, and the intensity is not changing. So the regulation should be more equal. And we absolutely agree with that. But I think that when you're creating a separate lot that can be bought and sold as a discrete piece of land and has its own development rights independent of any other land around it, that is historically the step in the development process where cities look at getting contributions to infrastructure. They look at getting contributions to right-of-way, to upgrading infrastructure, and to parkland as well. And so while we think that right sizing those regulations is appropriate and lessening the regulatory burden for smaller lot subdivisions is absolutely critical, we also think that there have to be some requirements that remain. If we go straight to building permit, a building permit level of review for all of these projects, the city loses its ability to ever get contributions from infrastructure because there's not a site plan process for a lot of these projects. So the goal is to right size, but also recognizing that subdivision is inherently a different process than just constructing units. And so there are going to be some additional steps in the process, but our goal is to make it as equal as we can. And we think this ordinance, coupled with the staff proposals that go along with it, goes a long way to doing that. And we look forward as well to continuing through the TARP and other procedures to work on further changes if council adopts this proposal. So those are my comments. And again, thanks, Matt, for the amazing presentation, and turn it back over to ECs.
And I do have just a couple more slides here. I don't know if you want to, Isis, you want me to go ahead and plow through those?
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go from wonky to super wonky at this point, and I'm hoping to describe this adequately. There's been definitely at the Environmental Commission meeting we had a number of concerns, and in the Planning Commission meeting we had previous to this, we had a number of concerns by residents, neighborhood folks, and the environment, and some environmental representatives about like what's going to happen to this local flood drainage system if we put in these if we allow these new projects to go in. And so we actually conveniently enough, did a study on this back a few number of years ago when the city was looking at missing middle, the same scale of site plan Lite kind of projects in the past, and we wanted to look at those. We also wanted to look at residential build out, what's going on there. So we actually used one of our engineering consultants we work with on these kind of projects to do modeling. And they actually looked at a small subdivision, which actually had not subdivision, small drainage area down in kind of near South Austin along South Lamar, that had a lot of drainage issues. It had some drainage concerns already. And so we looked at about a 60-ish acre watershed that drained through that area. And it had quite a bit of single family residential in the mix. And it also had some multifamily and commercial as well, along with some roadways, public rights of way. And so a bunch of it was single family residential. And so we looked at the current 31% impervious cover of that single family area and said, look, what would happen if we just maxed it out? And we actually pushed it a little higher. This would not be permissible. You could not go to 47%, but just for purposes of the study, we looked at it slightly higher just to see like how sensitive is this system to increases in impervious cover as single family residential kind of drifts higher toward its maximum. And I honestly was expecting there to be some major changes, there to be some more impacts. They found, and my drainage colleagues, I'm an environmental planner, my civil engineering friends were not surprised by the results of this when they looked at it. When we looked at a range of storm sizes, there's different engineers look at different flood scales, based on rainfall intensity. So there's kind of a 2-year storm that happens on average about 50% of the time every given year, 10-year storm, 10% chance, 25-year, 100-year, et cetera, 1% chance storm. We found that there was virtually no impact from this incremental extra development going on. I'm going to blow up the results so you can see it. This is kind of this is the paragraph that talked about the results from this scenario. And so in scenario 3, which basically showed what's the delta between today's world, where you had this 31% impervious cover overall single family residential along with these other land uses, what happens when that goes up and maxes out up to the 45% maximum level. We found that these guys found in their modeling future single family residential development in this watershed has very limited impact on peak flooding conditions. Comparing scenario 4 future conditions with scenario 1 existing conditions shows the same result. Maximum inundation depths are generally increased by no more than 1.12 feet, which is kind of the 1 inch or so, inch and a half kind of range during all storms, with most increases under 0.04 feet. So extremely light impacts. Here's the 100-year differential, kind of comparing 100-year flood with and without the infill. Like folks just see all these little individual white kind of clear. There's no shading on it. Just these are all the individual single family homes. If they were all to go all the way to 45%, every single one of them, which is actually in itself not a likely scenario, and certainly not in any kind of time scale. But if every one of those maxed out, you're just getting these little bitty impacts. These little kind of purple spots and this one building are things that changed. You got the incremental extra flows from these doesn't add up in a way that's meaningful to the system. Now, by the way, there's people in the floodplain here. That's a problem. We think it's a huge problem in watershed protection, and I'm sure the people that live there don't want to have that situation. And so this is an area that we built. We are currently working on and designing, and Kevin Shunk might be able to give an update on this, but this is the Del Curto storm drain system, and we're actively working on a solution that's going to basically take these, most of these structures out of a flood risk, or diminish it greatly. So again, we agree that there are local flood issues all over town. They need to be addressed, but we think that the evidence is showing that the tiny incremental infill kinds of things, which already are happening with our current code, and there's really no change in the scale of what's going to happen. But we do understand that folks are saying, well, hey, this is going to incentivize somebody to do this because they have more options. And that may be true. So who knows? So in terms of the pace of this, but we don't believe that there are going to be major negative impacts from this on the whole. And so this is my this in no way takes away from the importance of addressing local drainage. And I think that's a real big takeaway from us. So I'm gonna finally, I've just got 2 more slides. I know this has been a lot, and then we'll get into I'm looking forward to getting into questions from the audience. So council, here's the summary. Council has said, look, we have a housing crisis. We need to facilitate small small-scale infill housing. Our current codes and criteria don't get that done. Can you help us out here? So they had directed staff. So we have been busily trying to balance streamlining these changes that will help housing and also maintain positive drainage outcomes. We're focusing on the lot level of drainage impacts because we don't believe that local flooding or creek flooding is a scale that's going to be very affected by this scale of development. But we do think it is possible that at the lot level you could have some concerns, and so that's why we have these things that talk about, if you drain to the street, then that's best case scenario and such. We have separate proposals for infill plat and site plan light. Site plan light, there's just a little more intensive projects. These are going to go all the way to 65% impervious cover and so forth if they can. Whereas infill plat's a little smaller scale with the 45% impervious cover in terms of impacts. So that's why we have separate proposals for those. And so it's really been interesting. I love interacting with stakeholders, and we've, on the neighborhood and environmental community side, the main concerns we've heard are, hey, is this going to stress out our already burdened in some areas storm drainage systems, and what's going on? Or is this going to cause some issues? And then meanwhile, you've got other stakeholders on the housing side. They're saying, hey, we're trying to build small scale housing. We think this is a really important thing, and we don't think this is going far enough. This is not going to help. The way that the way you've drawn up this ordinance isn't addressing this fully. And so we're kind of in the middle here as staff trying to figure out something that's going to address these 2 concerns. And so that's where we are at this point. In a second, I'll show you this is it. There's not a lot more to the schedule than next Tuesday of next week. We will be going and finalizing, we believe, our discussion with the Planning Commission, and they will likely take a vote at that point. They've already had a couple of sessions where they've looked at this, and then the City Council is scheduled to hear this on Thursday, November 7th. And we know that there will be more work ahead. Brent did a great job talking about these other departments and the work that they're going to be helping out with to update criteria manual requirements and so forth. And then over time, we're going to need to monitor results and make adjustments. And just kind of in terms of scale, we were able to see that we actually checked in with our development services staff, and I said, well, how many of these Home 1 projects, just as an example, we've been mostly talking about Home 2 and Site Plan Light with this presentation, but Home 1's kind of an interesting case study because that's you could build 1 or 2 or 3 units thing. So how fast are those getting put in? And so we found out that there's about over the first 6 months that folks were able to do this for the first time, they got about just under 160 applications, and about 75% of those were for 2-unit projects. So majority of people that are using Home 1 at this point are building things that would probably look pretty much like we're seeing all over Austin already, where somebody puts in a duplex or a primary structure with an ADU in the back and so forth. But 40 of them were 3-unit projects, and that was kind of interesting. But compared to the 158,000 lots, that's, they're sprinkled around town. So anyway, kind of interesting. And so I think as we staff and the community will be looking at this over the next. And so here's the schedule. Recently, we went to the Environmental Commission, got some good feedback there. We talked to the Planning Commission on August 27th and got good public testimony and so forth there as well. We met earlier this week with the City Council's Housing and Planning Committee, and they all these are things you can go back and watch online and ATXN. And then and so here we are at this community meeting on Zoom. Appreciate everybody coming and bearing with our presentation here, and looking for the questions. And then next week we've got Planning Commission, and then a little while later, plant council. And so I am going to stop sharing my screen if I can. Okay, stop share. Did that work? I think it did.
Yeah, thank you so
Wow.
much, Matt.
You're welcome.
Okay, so thank you, Matt, for the presentation and Brett for the comments. Again, we have folks from Development Services Department and Watershed Protection Department in our panel today to answer questions. Friendly reminder, we have a lot of folks in this presentation here today. So to make sure that we get to everybody's questions as best possible, if you can please post them on the Q&A and the question and answer feature of Zoom. You can find that at the bottom of your Zoom window. That helps us keep track of which ones we've answered and which ones we still need to answer, versus the chat, which kind of merges them all together. The Q&A function is able to make them one individually. Some of them have already been answered by Brett, so if you can take a look at the Q&A feature, you can see which ones have already been published. There's 2 that have been typed in, so or actually 3 that have been answered by one of our subject matter experts, Brent, who's leading this in this proposal. And there are a few who are still coming in. So if you like to ask some questions, we have that Q&A feature, and I will get started in asking some of those out loud. All right. One of the questions that might have already been addressed, but feel free to reiterate, Matt or Brett. Somebody is asking for the logic for applying drainage requirements for an 18,000 square foot lot versus a 0.25 acre lot, and then the rationale as to why that line is drawn where it is.
And Isis, I'm not seeing this question on the Q&A. Let me see if I'm probably looking at the wrong one. Yep, I am looking at the wrong thing. Sorry about that,
And
guys.
I can repeat it, yeah, and so if you can chime in on the logic for applying drainage requirements for an 18,000 square foot lot versus a 0.25 acre lot, why that line is drawn where it is, and if any other panelists would like to chime in, if you have a.
I mean, there's no, I mean, the short answer, there's not going to be a magic number of like, this is some bright line of, 0.25 versus 0.3 versus whatever else we could put on there. Some of the other regulations we have, 8,000 square feet of impervious cover. If you've got more than that, then you got to build a water quality pond, that kind of thing. We actually looked at a number of options and landed on 0.25 acres is kind of that's just a really standard scale. In fact, 70, I think I mentioned 75% of all lots fall into that. I mean, so most single family lots look like that or smaller. And we're just generally not seeing a lot of drainage issues on those projects. Does that mean there can't be one? Absolutely. There's, there are here and there, you get some issues that are created if and that need to be addressed, and somebody needs to go back and put in a little drainage swale or a French drain or what have you, or redirect some guttering or whatever needs to happen. But generally, we felt like 0.25 acres was was a reasonable and kind of an intuitive number as opposed to something more wonky.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Another question that was asked is it accurate to estimate an RSMP fee to be around $40,000 to split a 16,000 square foot lot into a 3,000 to 5,570 square foot lots?
Kevin, do you want to give this one a shot? Not.
Yeah, sure. I'm Kevin Shunk. I'm the city's floodplain administrator, and also have the RSP program under my wing. Difficult for me to say if that's an accurate number, but what I will say is there is a RSMP calculator on the website, and that allows you to put in information like lot size, impervious cover existing, impervious cover proposed, and the type of development, and it will come up with the approximate RSMP payment that you can look at. So I would direct you to the RSMP website to answer that question.
And we will get, we will have, with the proposal we have, we will have if you have a very small subdivision that is under 0.25 acres, you would not, this would not come up at all. So that there's a lot of discussion by council about, condos versus actual subdivision, and wanting to be able to make it where a teeny subdivision that look like in my picture, these adjacent projects, one of them's very same footprint. Let's make it a little easier. But as it gets bigger, that sometimes we believe that the regional stormwater management program is still an appropriate thing if your drainage is not is a little more complicated. All right,
Got
so
it.
let's go to the next product.
Yeah, and I went ahead and put that link on the chat so everybody can be able
Perfect.
to look at that and click on that link. The next question is, if the site 90% drains to the street and the part that doesn't drain to the street doesn't have the impervious cover, will on-site detention still be required? So
Kevin,
the site,
Kevin, I'm gonna let you take that one. I know on the water quality side, that'd be a no. You wouldn't have to treat water that's not part of the developed footprint or the site, but I'm not sure the answer on the detention side.
So the detention requirements for a site are based upon the points at which water is leaving the property. And you can represent that we call them points of analysis. At point of analysis A, in existing conditions, there's X amount of flow leaving the property. And in proposed conditions, since there's no impervious cover, maybe it's the same amount of water. So that area wouldn't require detention because you're not increasing the flows at that point of analysis. Whereas where the impervious covers is in that drainage area, you will be increasing the amount of runoff. And so either RSMP or detention might be required.
And I think this is a great question because I think I can imagine, and this is where we staff and the community we need to work together on our rules. Is in the end, you're going to have sites that are this gray scale of complexity, and you're going to have a few like, well, hey, most of the water goes here, but then a little bit goes over there. Do we have to go into this more complicated bin, or can we stay in the simplified one? And so that'll probably take some more nuanced effort to figure out, when you land in those different three categories. It's easy to talk about the three categories, but I think we'll probably need more attention on that. But anyway, appreciate the question.
okay, thank you. So one of the questions that we have, if somebody's asking how long we believe the subdivision process will take, if there's anything in writing about how long the subdivision process will take.
Yeah, I'll just, we have Chris Yanez here who leads our subdivision group, but I will just say that I know that, from talking to all of you at testing and at other times as well, that just getting the review time reduced and some more predictability in that is absolutely critical to the success of this effort. So we hear you on that. What we're going to have to do during the implementation phase, we have requested a delayed effective date for this ordinance so that we have the ability to work internally as well as with our partner departments to streamline the process. And I think that during that phase, we're going to go through, and we've already begun this effort, actually, we're going through all of the items on the various review checklists and asking ourselves, is this still necessary in light of all the regulatory enhancements that we're proposing? And then beyond that, just asking, is this serving a value? Is this necessary to ensure that the project complies with code? So our goal is very much to end up with a process that will have a reduced timeline. The drainage process in particular is one that adds a significant amount of time to the review process. And when that is, for some projects eliminated altogether, and for others, it will be a much more streamlined process. We believe that is going to reduce review time significantly, but we're not yet in a place where we can give you a specific number of days. We want to get there. We're committed to getting there. We believe this is going to make a real difference, but I don't think we're yet able to pinpoint an exact number of days. Chris, do you have any observations to make about just generally ways in which this proposal could help with the review process, or any of the items that we've been discussing internally?
I don't. Hello, everybody. This is Chris Yanez. I'm Program Manager with Development Services over Subdivision. And I don't really have anything substantive to add. I would simply say that, generally speaking, because we are looking to reduce and relax regulations for infill plats, that it should facilitate a speedier process. That's our hope. But it's difficult to speculate at this point what that looks like, because we haven't done it yet. You know, these code provisions haven't been adopted, and we haven't gotten any applications under our belt to really see how that works, but that's our hope.
Thank you for the answer and for that question for asking. I would like to remind folks that there's a few questions that have already been answered and typed in by our staff. Everybody will receive a copy of these answers as well. So if you didn't get a chance to look at them right now, you will receive a summary of those answers as well. And then for those that we aren't able to answer today, either because we don't have information or missing information, we'll be able to provide that summary as well. Okay. The next question that we have is about reduced fees for subdivision. So for reduced fees for subdivision in site plan Lite 2, the community member noted that we currently see so few missing middle projects. And then, saying that therefore the city receives a relatively small amount of fees. So their comment would be, reducing the fees will result in more projects and potentially more revenue for the city. So thank you for that comment. And I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that comment.
Yeah, I'll just say that that's a very astute observation, and it's a possibility that we've certainly discussed internally as well. Just like with review times, fees are going to take some time to nail down. Our fee schedule is based on a cost of service study that provides an empirical basis for how fees are calculated and adopted concurrent with the annual budget. And so we're not going to be able to have fee adjustments proposed right out of the gate when this ordinance is implemented. But we have already begun internally looking at ways to track review times and look at the impacts of these modified regulations on the review process, so that going into next year to the budget cycle, we will be prepared to propose appropriate fee modifications. And definitely we've, discussed internally the possibility that if we get more of these projects online, that even though the fees may be reduced somewhat, that will result in a greater aggregate number of fees, given the proliferation, hopefully, of new missing middle housing consistent with council's goals.
Great, thank you, Bert. Great.
AC, so I'm not sure how this works in terms of the, moving questions over. There was a good question about, does this affect other projects besides multifamily that are site plan oriented? How do we handle that? Do we need to have that typed in or something, or do we?
No, you can, you want to go
just
ahead and
take it?
Did you have a comment on it? Yeah, go for it.
Sure. And so, there's various kinds of zoning that allow different projects, of course. And so you might have one so what we're focusing on here, because the council said, hey, let's make housing an easier thing. And so we're focusing on missing middle site plan type housing with site plan Lite Part 2. And so, you might have a MF1, MF2, MF3 zones that allow a certain amount of housing, units to be built on a given property of what certain acreage. So that's what we're focusing on. And those have limits that I mentioned of 60 and 65%, depending on those zones. There are other housing options of, like, say, mixed use, and you could do a mixed use project that would need a different kind of zoning. And so we're seeing that those with maybe CSMU or GRMU and so forth along corridors. And so so those have options right now. You could bring in a small scale version of that now through the RSMP option that we mentioned earlier. But that would cap out at half an acre, and you wouldn't get that new option that we're offering for the 65% and down group. So yes, you could do it, but if you're greater than an acre, you're gonna have to follow the full code the way this is being proposed. So that's a great question, because some mixed use projects, obviously, it's one of the main things they do is deliver housing as well as commercial opportunities.
Great, thanks for that information there.
Mm-hmm.
Matt and or Brett, is there anything else that y'all would like to add before we wrap up? Anything that we might have missed?
Come on out to Planning Commission and council. Those would be two additional great ways to give public input to the process.
Yeah, we'll be at Planning Commission next Tuesday on the 8th, and they've already conducted their main public hearing, but there always will be opportunities to testify now. So you can testify at that meeting and also hear their deliberations, and hopefully they'll take action then. And then also on November 7th, that is the date we're scheduled for the council public hearing and hopefully their action as well. So we hope to see all of you there, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments regarding the ordinance. And we've really benefited from everybody's feedback. It's affected the ordinance in substantial ways, in most of which we've mentioned in this meeting. But we're certainly open to considering further feedback as well. And then, as I mentioned, we've recommended that there be a delayed effective date for the ordinance so that we have time to work interdepartmentally to really improve our review procedures. And we're open to your suggestions as well during that process. So appreciate everybody's time and turn it back over to ECs.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Thank you, Matt. And I want to thank all of City of Boston staff members for being here today and answering the questions. But I also want to thank our attendees today for taking some time during maybe your lunch hour to listen to our staff members and to engage with us and get some of those questions answered. If you have additional questions, I will put a public input page. Feel free to put it in there as well. We'll be collecting that feedback and sharing it with our subject matter experts as well. And as I mentioned, we recorded this session. We'll share a copy of the recording along with a copy of the presentation and a summary of the question and answer session to everybody who registered for this community meeting. Have a great rest of your day and appreciate everybody's time and everybody's questions. Thank you.